This video is made possible by my patrons on Patreon. Hello everyone, my name is Ziamaro and welcome to Battlerite Sage. Last week I made a video describing what changed in the 1.5.2 patch, and oh boy were there a lot of changes. I actually ended up having to quickly skim over a few things, and the video still ended up being over 12 minutes long, which is pretty close to the upper limit of how long I like to make videos. I had a few comments asking for a deeper explanation of what effect the changes would have on the meta. So the fact that it took 12 minutes just to describe what changed meant that I didn't have time to talk about the meta implications. So let me just quickly explain. I make patch notes videos for people who want to know what's changing, but they don't want to sit there reading through it all. I've said it before, but when I make videos, I make the videos that I personally would want to see. And for me, I would rather watch a 10-minute video talking about what's changed while I eat or something else, rather than have to read through it. So that's why I make the patch videos, and I'll continue to do it that way. However, what I can do is make a separate video talking about the meta implications. After every patch, there's always a slight meta shift. But this patch, well, this one is anything but a slight shift. I'm going to presume that you've either read the patch notes or watched my patch notes video. I'll also be referencing pick and win rates in BPL, so I've left links to those in the video description. So with that in mind, let's talk about what the effects of the changes will be. First up, let's talk about supports. I think supports are probably the best place to start. I guess I'm a little bit biased because I'm a support main, but here's the way I see it. In an actual game, melee champions are the ones who make the engagements and dictate how a comp should be played. For example, if you have a Shifu, you can cause chaos in the enemy back line, which would give your ranged player plenty of room to do what they want. If, on the other hand, you have a Bacco, they'll be looking to make big in-caps and set up for burst combos. The point I'm trying to make is that your melee pick dictates how your comp plays out. If you play Bacco, you end up with a setup and burst comp. If you have a Freya or Shifu, you're probably going for high pressure and sustain. But here's the thing, a melee champion needs a support with them who can enable what they do. Really, the dynamic goes both ways, so if there's a particularly strong melee champion, you just pick a support who enables their playstyle and go for it. However, for the last few months, we've gone from one OP support to another. As a result, since the free-to-play launch, team comps and the meta have pretty much always revolved around the support pick. So, in the last patch, Ulric and Zander received some heavy nerfs, while Poloma and Blossom received some significant buffs. Zander was already subjected to a lot of nerfs, so the fact that he's been heavily nerfed again puts him in a pretty bad place now. Since the patch, I've only seen one Zander in my solo queue games. One! In quite a few games as well. And in BPL, it's kind of a similar story. We have seen a few Zander picks, but his win rate is looking really bad. I've always kind of thought, when you look at Zander's kit, he's a very slippery defensive champion. He has a portal for saving teammates, flat damage reduction on his heals, a cleanse, an AoE CC, and a bunch of iframes and escapes. That, at least to me, feels like the kit of an anti-aggression champion. Sure, he has his EX Space Burst or the Sheep into Mouse 2 combo, but other than that, something that I think Zander excels at is slowing down enemy pressure. And the way he does that is by sheeping people. He can cleanse in-caps or portal to prevent burst damage, and he can generally just lower team damage altogether. I feel like Stunlock are trying to keep his kit a bit too wide, and that's kind of the problem with him. He offers way too much to his team. I feel like he needs to be shaped in a direction a little more. I think either he should keep his burst damage and then nerf Portal, Sheep and Spotlight into the ground, or nerf his burst damage, which they have done, and keep Portal, Sheep and Spotlight as his selling points. But instead, pretty much everything has been nerfed. Don't get me wrong, he definitely needed to be addressed, but he still has the issue of an overly bloated kit. He just does too much of everything. And the dilemma with a champion like that is either his numbers are good and he's OP, or you lower his numbers across the board and he's borderline useless. I truly think his kit needs to be shaped either towards the anti-aggression style with a strong Spotlight, Sheep and Portal in his kit, or nerf all of those considerably and give him back some of his burst damage. On the other hand, it could just be a matter of people relearning Zander, so I would probably wait before changing him again. But in any case, I think you're going to be seeing a lot less of Zander for now. Ulric, on the other hand, still seems pretty strong. These nerfs, at least in the tournament meta, mean that he's no longer a must-pick at least, but I think he still might be a little bit too strong. His pick and win rate in BPL, both in EU and NA, are still very high. It's definitely a step in the right direction, but I think he might still need a few more tweaks. It's actually kind of funny because all of his most used Battlerites have been nerfed, and even some of his base kit has been nerfed, yet he's still really strong. It just goes to show how stupidly overpowered he was before. Honestly, I don't really have much more to say about Ulric. I think we're just going to have to apply the wait and see approach with this. The changes to Blossom are quite interesting. Her kind-hearted Battlerite was already a must-pick in 3v3, so the fact that that got buffed is kind of just a flat buff to Blossom in general, and it really solidifies that Battlerite in her build. Her Boom Bloom cooldown was reduced, and so was one of the associated Battlerites, so again that's just kind of a flat buff to her kit. But the thing that I find most interesting is the Refreshing Seed change. Refreshing Seed was actually flat out broken before. It's supposed to apply haste when either the tree expires or it's destroyed. Before this patch, I think it only applied when the tree expired, which meant that if the tree was destroyed, as it often is, the Battlerite was completely useless. Now the haste buff is applied even when the tree is destroyed, so that means you can kite around the tree, and when it either expires or it's destroyed, you and anyone else in the tree's radius gets a 40% movement speed increase for 2.5 seconds. That's actually really useful. On top of that, the base tree health was increased from 24 to 30. Before, it was kind of hard to justify not taking Healthful Bark for the increased tree health. It's still a strong Battlerite, but I think you can actually justify taking other rights now. So all in all, this patch is a pretty decent buff to Blossom's survivability and her healing. And as a result, we've actually seen her in tournaments for the first time in a while. Poloma's changes are also quite interesting. The buff to Shimmering Bond means that you heal your main target for 8 health, while healing your linked allies, including yourself, for 7. That's actually a huge buff to Poloma's survivability and her overall healing output. And if that wasn't enough, her EXQ now heals her for 20 instead of 15. Add to that the cooldown reduction on Pixie, Poloma's overall output and survivability has received a huge buff in this patch. So what does all of this mean? Well, as I said, Ulric might still be a little overtuned. But all in all, it means a lot more variety in support picks potentially. And variety in support picks means more comp variety, which can only be a good thing. Next, let's move on to the melee changes. So we've seen some big changes to the supports in this patch, and as I said, supports have dictated the meta for a while now, so having a wider variety of viable supports is a good thing for everyone. The thing is though, we'll probably see a big shift in the melee meta too. Freya and Shifu have both received nerfs, while most of the tanky melee champions have been buffed. I should probably clarify that the Freya changes are definitely an overall nerf, but it's also a shift in her playstyle. Her sustained melee damage and shields have been heavily nerfed, but her range poke has actually been significantly improved. Before, Shifu and Freya kinda occupied the same space in the meta, but this change makes their playstyles very different. Shifu is now the go-to, in-your-face, high-pressure melee, while Freya is a little more pokey than before. The changes have definitely affected Freya's pick rate, but relatively speaking, she's still actually doing okay, at least when you compare her to what's happened to Zander. For the solo queue meta, I think the Rook changes probably have the biggest effect. According to Stunlock, Rook has the highest win rate of any melee in Grand Champion. At least that's what it says during some of the breaks in BPL. He was already a pretty dominant force in the solo queue meta, but he still didn't even get picked once in Pro League this weekend, even with these buffs. Maybe it's a matter of teams needing to scrim some more with him before playing him in a tournament, but it kind of feels like these buffs just make him more obnoxious for casual players, while not really improving his viability in pro play. It's actually a similar story to an even greater extent with Raigon. His damage numbers have been buffed 2 patches in a row now, and unlike Rook, he was actually picked a bunch of times in Pro League over the weekend. The only thing is, the team who picked Raigon, more often than not, lost. So, same thing as with Rook. I feel like these changes don't do much for his top level viability, they just create more frustration for casual players. I think the most noticeable change in the melee meta though is Thorn. His buffs have had an immediate impact on the pro meta and solo queue. Thorn had an insanely high pick rate in EU last night, and while he's never been quite as popular with NA teams, he was still picked a fair bit and he had a decent win rate. So his sustain and damage are significantly improved thanks to the EX M2 and the Thorn buff changes. And if that wasn't enough, he also pairs up pretty well with Ulric. So that puts Thorn in a very solid place for pro play right now. And he's definitely a strong pick for solo queue too. So all in all, I think the melee meta is shifting away from sustained damage dealers and more towards tanky champions like Thorn and Bacco. Finally, let's talk briefly about ranged champions. Honestly, ranged received the fewest changes in the latest patch, but as I've said, support and melee picks can often dictate ranged picks. 2 champions who did receive noticeable changes are Alysia and Jade. Alysia has been a relatively weak champion since her release in December. She's actually been buffed in almost every patch since then, and maybe, just maybe, she might be viable now. Her pick and win rates are still kind of abysmal in BPL so far, but I've seen a lot of Alysias in solo queue, and oh my god, they're so annoying. The uptime on chill and freeze just feels so much higher. She's an absolute control god right now. Her issue is still that she's very punishable once her space ability is down. But if you give Alysia room to do her thing, she is a complete pain right now. You absolutely have to put pressure on her, or she'll single-handedly tear your team apart. As I said, she's still very punishable once her space is down, so that makes her a bit of a risky pick in organised games, but she's in a much better place than she was before. Jade, on the other hand, has been nerfed again. She's actually been nerfed a few times over the last few months. Solo queue players will definitely be happy about this, but she was already a weak pick in tournaments. I've said it before, but I think the balance strategy is a bit all over the place in this patch. Rook received buffs, presumably to make him more viable in tournaments when he was already tearing up solo queue. Meanwhile, Jade is a pain for solo queue players but weak in tournaments, yet she received nerfs. I have no problem with either balance strategy, but it just seems a bit inconsistent. Overall, despite a few gripes, I think this patch is a huge step in the right direction. The supports in this game have dictated the meta for way too long. So while Ulric might still need a little work, we're a lot closer than we were before. And with a less support dictated meta, we move towards wider comp diversity, which honestly I think is the ultimate goal for any game like Battlerite. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then please feel free to subscribe for more Battlerite guides, news and discussion. If you'd like to help support the channel and get some unique rewards, then head over to patreon.com/battleritesage. And don't forget to check out twitch.tv/battleritesage. Until next time, thank you for watching and I'll see you soon.